What if I told you that you couldn't have an opinion, that you couldn't have a voice? Today, we as students have a voice to a great degree, but that wasn't always the case. Today, our communities rely on us using our voice and our freedom of expression in order to uplift them. My name is Rohan Movva, and I'm from Milton, Georgia. Milton is a small community in North Georgia, but it is strong. And in Milton, above all, community is emphasized the most. In Milton, we have a lifelong bond to our community because of what our community shows to us and what we give to our community. To show how speaking up as a student has led my Milton community to become stronger, we need to take it back a little bit. The year is 1965, and the United States is in the midst of the Vietnam War. 13-year-old student Mary Beth at Warren Harding Junior High wanted to protest the Vietnam War and be a part of the anti-war movement by wearing a black armband. Her and four of her friends wanted to do this. The school board got wind of this and passed a preemptive ban. Nonetheless, Mary Beth and four of her friends went ahead and wore those armbands. They were asked to remove them and were then suspended. It wasn't until after Christmas break that they were allowed to return to school once they agreed not to wear the armbands and wore black for the rest of the year in protest. Along with this, they filed a First Amendment lawsuit, and that lawsuit went all the way to the Supreme Court. On February 24th, 1969, a historic day for students all across the country, the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that the students do not shed their constitutional rights to the freedom of speech or freedom of expression at the schoolhouse gate, so long as it does not hinder the educational process. The court found that the black armbands were a symbol of the freedom of expression, and thus were allowed. They did not hinder the educational process. But how did Mary Beth help her community? She just spoke out, she broke a couple rules, did this and that. Mary Beth took the harder way. She did what others didn't have to do. Today, it's known as the Tinker Standard for kids, and it is the leading K-12 First Amendment student rights case based, and every other First Amendment student rights case is based on this one case alone. Over time, the Tinker Standard has decreased and increased, but it has remained the Tinker Standard. And 5 decades later, students are able to still practice the Tinker Standard and have freedom of expression at the schoolhouse gate. Mary Beth very well could have saved lives and used her voice to create different movements, because one of the main things the Vietnam War is remembered for is student activism and campus unrest. And while that didn't end the Vietnam War, it did lead the public to greater anti-war movements. Mary Beth did what she really didn't have to do. She could have stayed silent, she could have followed the rules, but she didn't. And she was brave enough to do it, even though the consequences were harsh. She said that she was nervous. She said, I was nervous and scared. And even when we don't feel brave, we can do brave things. To put it simply, because of the Tinker Standard, you have the First Amendment right to freely express your political beliefs at the schoolhouse gate. If you wanted to wear either of these t-shirts, you can freely do that at your school with no consequences. The Tinker Standard is far, but it does not encompass everything. And one of the things it does not encompass is student press freedom rights. This hit close to home. As a student journalist myself facing censorship, I looked around in my Milton community. It was vast. Student press freedom was something that we thought our Milton community needed, and we wanted to make our voice heard. First, what is censorship? Censorship can occur in many different forms. Some obvious, some not so obvious. Some obvious ways are shutting down school newspapers, blocking articles, shutting down the multimedia broadcast. Some less obvious ways could be disciplining, intimidating a student with disciplinary actions for something they wrote or published. From my encounters in my Milton community and as a student journalist, I have found the freedom of speech and freedom of press to be a fundamental right to build every community upon. The freedom of press and freedom of speech allow everyone to share their perspectives. And it is important. There are 2 different theories that highlight why it's so important. The first being that the United States is a representative democracy. And as a representative democracy, it's important for the different values, different perspectives to all come together in what is known as the marketplace of ideas. And in the marketplace of ideas, one main idea emerges from all these different perspectives and values put together. And without this marketplace of ideas, there are limited perspectives and limited community engagement. Furthermore, the freedom of the press is important because the press is the watchdog. The press is the watchdog when it comes to school officials, government officials, events. It's the voice of the people. And it protects us. Putting this back into perspective in my Milton community, we wanted our voice to be heard. And as supportive as the Milton community is, we sought support from the Milton City Council and the Milton Mayor Office. We were able to get a proclamation passed on behalf of all student journalists across the city of Milton. We were able to honor student journalism excellence while showing that Milton supports student press freedom. And while there is still a lot to do for Georgia to get student press freedom rights, I saw this in my own community. The power of many voices coming together as one community with one goal, it's unbeatable. We saw in our Milton community, in our school communities, that freedom of expression was lacking. And we wanted to increase that. And the best way to increase that was to make sure the students had their voices heard. And this is the way we believe that we can have our student voices heard. Today, creating conversations is more important than ever, discussing the different perspectives, discussing the different nuances. And today we have all the resources at our availability to create those conversations better than any other time. And utilizing those is what I believe to be our duty to our community. And our community relies on these perspectives and these ideas in order to engage and build upon. And while the students don't have all the rights, there are some things that have limited the Tinker Standard, such as Bethel versus Frazier or Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeyer. But there are other things that have increased the Tinker Standard and student rights, such as Board of Education versus PICO and the Equal Access Act, which have allowed for philosophical, political, and religious beliefs and school household when it comes to freedom of expression. Furthermore, 16 states have passed student press freedom legislation. And student press freedom legislation is done on a state-by-state basis. Some of those states are California, Arkansas, Iowa, and New Jersey. It's a bipartisan issue, passing in Nevada unanimously very recently. But 34 states still don't have these rights, including my beloved Georgia, which me and my fellow student journalists are working so hard to get because we believe it's a fundamental right. Nonetheless, the freedoms we have as students are vast. And we have so many resources at our availability to help build our community with our voice alone. Two historically well-respected presidents. They didn't serve in the same time period. They did not directly oppose each other. But they did have differing views. And conflict was not new to them. President Ronald Reagan said, "Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means." You think no conflict meant wonderful, no conflict meant success, but no conflict meant no perspective. No conflict meant limited perspective, where there was no marketplace of ideas to build that main idea out of. It was hard to create the best way possible with limited perspectives. And you create conflict, but you solve it peacefully. Furthering on that idea, President John F. Kennedy, during his inaugural address, inspired Americans from workers to students to parents to seek civic action in their communities by saying, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country." And every American worked to create the best American society that they thought was possible. But they had different views, different opinions. But at the end, they had one community, one American community, and one goal that they wanted to create the best American community that they could with all their different perspectives. So, with that being said, freedom today is given to us as students because the students have worked so hard for it previously. And our communities rely on our voice and our freedom of expression in order to build our communities stronger than ever before. Freedom has given us so much. And before I conclude, can I just get a round of applause for freedom? Just for freedom. With that being said, I want to end with a question that has led me to my community and how I have furthered my community. I hope it can help you in your community. How can I leverage my voice in conversations with others in order to build my community? Thank you.